Hey, hey, hey. Chapter 12, Lewis and Clark. Let's find out what happens. This chapter is titled Homeward Journey. All right, here we go. There was more rain as the explorers made their way up the Columbia River. From time to time, they stopped to explore the land. Their hunting parties kept ahead of the canoes, seeking elk and deer. Paddling was hard work. The river current was very strong, and there were dangerous rapids. Often the canoes had to be towed or carried. Ugh. From the moment they left Fort Clatsop, the explorers can think of little but the Rocky Mountains. They couldn't forget how they had suffered from cold and hunger in crossing the mountains just months before. That wretched portion of our journey is what Clark called it. The explorers needed to keep moving at a rapid pace. So, boys and girls, for those of you who go skiing, I want you to think about where you ski. So the Rocky Mountains, if you are skiing in Snoqualmie, imagine a long, long time ago, no roads, no nothing, no cars. You're just walking to get from one side of the mountains to the other. That's what it's like. So think in your head where you are when you go skiing and think about those people who had to walk across those mountains. And now they know what it's like and they have to walk back. And they're going, oh, that was terrible. That was horrible. Oh, I'm so scared to do that again. Sometimes it's better when you don't know what's going to happen, when you don't know the hardship that you're going to face. But when you know it and you have to do it again, oh, that's tough. But they did it. The explorers needed to keep moving at a rapid pace. The captain's goal was to recross the Rockies and reach the Missouri River before it froze. If they weren't able to reach their goal, they'd have to spend another winter in the wilderness. Nobody wanted to do that. As the men made their way up the Columbia River, they passed some of the same Native Americans they had met while traveling west the previous year. The Native Americans welcomed the explorers as friends. On April 1st, the expedition met bands of Native Americans in canoes who were making their way downstream. These Native Americans explained that they had used up their supply of dried fish, and now they were scouting the countryside for food. Uh-oh, that was bad news. In the country ahead, there was no elk. There were no deer. The captains had been planning on buying dried fish from the Native Americans. So the captains decided to halt the expedition for a few days. Hunting parties were sent out. Elk, deer, and other game that they killed was jerked. Remember what that means? They made it into jerky. That meat supply would have to last until they reached the Chopinish villages. As they made their way up the river, the explorers continued to struggle against the rapids. They were near the Great Falls of the Columbia. Their equipment and supplies would have to be carried around the falls. Fortunately, they were able to buy horses from the Native Americans. The horses did the heavy carrying. Not all the Native Americans were helpful. The Walclella, for example, were difficult. Clark described them as being the greatest thieves and scoundrels we have met with. Now imagine you're trying to make your way back. You have hardly anything, and then people come along and steal your stuff. That's got to be heartbreaking. So of course he, did not feel good about them because they were stealing his stuff. The Walclella tried to even steal Lewis's dog, Seaman. When Lewis learned of the attempted theft, he sent 3 men to try to get the dog back. If the Walclella resisted, the men were under orders to shoot them. Luckily, when the Walclella realized that they were being pursued, they left the dog and fled. The expedition later lost a robe and a saddle to the Walclella. The Walclella did not think they were stealing from the explorers. In their culture, if you weren't making use of something, it was there for someone else to use. Lewis and Clark thought the Walclella were thieves, but the Walclella could not understand why their behavior upset the white strangers. It's just different cultures, right? Farther up the river, the explorers met the Walla Walla. They were much different. They brought food and firewood to the explorers. They also gave the expedition 2 canoes. A Walla Walla chief presented Clark with an elegant white horse. The explorers stayed with the Walla Walla for 3 days. Of the Walla Walla, Lewis wrote, "They are the most hospitable, honest, and sincere people that we have met with in our voyage." Leaving the Walla Walla, the explorers continued up the Columbia. Where it turned north, they left the river. They then followed an overland route to the east. They were entering Chopinish country. The explorers set up camp along the Clearwater River near the Chopinish village. Food was in short supply. Clark's medical skills helped to solve the food problem. He had earlier become known as a healer among the Chopinish. Now he began treating their various illnesses. In return, Clark accepted food. Clark treated as many as 50 Chopinish a day. Sore eyes were a common ailment. There were also infections and back pain. From their campsite, the explorers could see the snow-covered Bitterroot Mountains. Despite the dangers they knew they would encounter in crossing the mountains, the explorers were eager to get started. But the Chopinish warned them, the snow is too deep. The captains would have to wait. A week went by, then 2 weeks, then 3. On June 10th, after almost a month of waiting, the explorers were ready to set out for the Bitterroots. Chief Twisted Hair had returned to them the horses that the captains had left in his care. Although they were friendly with the explorers, the Chopinish did not want to provide them with guides. They feared that the Blackfoot or another hostile band would attack them. For the first few days, all went well, but when the expedition reached the high country, things got difficult. The snow was still 14 or 15 deep in some places. 14 or 15 deep. Okay, boys and girls, think about Teacher Jessica's husband, Fletcher. He is 7'8". Think about how tall he is. He's not even 8 feet tall, but the snow was 14 feet or 15 feet. Imagine that. Tony's dad plus another Tony's dad. That's really, really, really deep, isn't it? So the snow was still 14 or 15 feet deep in many places. The horses kept slipping and falling. At times, they couldn't find the trail. Oops, I think I said 7 foot. He's 6'8". I'm sorry, Fletcher, if I misspoke. The horses kept slipping and falling. At times, they couldn't find the trail. Since the grass was snow-covered, there was often nothing for the horses to eat. The captains sadly decided that they would have to turn back. As Clark noted in his journal, "This is the first time since we have been on this tour that we have been compelled to retreat." The captains did not attempt to test the Bitterroots again until they could convince the Chopinish to provide them with guides. When they set out a second time, the going was easier. Lewis called the Chopinish guides most admirable pilots. The snow was deep but firm, which means they could walk on it. At this point, Lewis and Clark made a fateful decision. Oh, I'm going to take a moment here. How do you think they walked on the snow? It doesn't really say it in here, at least so far. But how do you walk on snow that's really deep? I'm not going to tell you. I want you to think about it and maybe come up with what you think. Maybe Google it. Do some research. How do you walk on snow and not fall through and just sink into it? Because there's a way. Okay, I'll let you tell me. At this point, Lewis and Clark made a fateful decision. They decided to split up. Lewis, with 9 men, would take a new, shorter route to the Missouri River. From there, he would set out to explore the Marias River. Once he had completed this mission, Lewis would wait at the mouth of the Marias. There, he would meet members of the party coming down the Missouri. Sergeant John Ordway would be leading these men. Meanwhile, Clark and other members of the expedition would set out on foot and build their canoes. They learned how to do that, remember? They would explore the Yellowstone River. They planned to follow the Yellowstone downstream to the Missouri. I know some of you friends have been in Yellowstone, so think about that. Think about that. Now, in Yellowstone, there's roads. There were no roads back then. They were just exploring. It was a risky plan. The captains were dividing the expedition into small groups just as they were entering country where the Blackfoot and other warring bands of Native Americans roamed. On July 17th, Lewis began to explore the Marias River. Perhaps it would come close to Canada's Saskatchewan River. The Marias would then be part of a route for bringing furs south out of Canada. But Lewis soon found that the Marias flowed west, not north, into Canada. Lewis decided to head back. He and his men had seen many signs of Native Americans. Lewis suspected that they were not friendly. He wanted to avoid them. On July 25th, 1806, he wrote, "We consider ourselves extremely fortunate in not having met with these people." The next day, Lewis's fortune changed. His good fortune changed. He saw a very unpleasant sight. 8 Blackfoot warriors. Lewis decided to approach them as a friend. He invited the Blackfoot to camp with him and his men that night. Lewis stayed up late smoking with the Blackfoot. By sign language, he told them of his close ties with the Chopinish and the Shoshone. This news alarmed the Blackfoot because these nations were their enemy. Lewis did not trust the Blackfoot. He worried that they might try to steal their horses. He assigned Private Reuben Field to stand guard. Then Lewis went to sleep. Loud shouts awoke Lewis at daybreak. "Let go of my gun!" he heard Drouillet yell. Drouillet was scuffling with a Blackfoot over a rifle. Another Blackfoot had grabbed rifles belonging to Reuben Field and his brother Joseph. When the Blackfoot ran off, the Field brothers went after them and caught them. A fierce struggle followed. Reuben Field stabbed a Blackfoot with his knife. Drouillet, meanwhile, pursued the Blackfoot who had his rifle. After he caught him, he managed to get his rifle back without any